HOA paved my seep. So I let their ornamental lake shrink to cracked clay. How could paving over a seep possibly affect an ornamental lake? And why would someone simply stand back and let that lake shrink until only cracked clay remained? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I am glad you are here for another unforgettable neighborhood justice story. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Thank you for watching, supporting the channel, and continuing to spend your time with us. Your support truly helps keep these stories coming. Before we get started, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Let's begin the story. You cut off our water. Mary Ann Prescott stood at the edge of what used to be Silvermere Estate's ornamental lake, staring at me as if I had personally pulled a drain plug somewhere beneath the cracked earth. It was late August in North Carolina, 93 degrees before noon, and the sun had baked the exposed lakebed into hard brown plates separated by dark, crooked lines. The white fountain that used to throw water 20 feet into the air sat motionless near the center, surrounded by dry clay instead of blue water. A faint smell of warm mud and dead grass drifted across the shoreline. I stood behind the split-rail fence with dust on my work boots and watched Mary Ann point toward me with one manicured hand. "You did something to this lake." Her voice carried across the empty basin. I looked past her at the stranded fountain intake, then toward the service road climbing behind the clubhouse. "I never touched your lake." Her jaw tightened. "Then explain this." I glanced down at the cracked clay. "You touched mine." She stared at me, confused, and that was the problem from the beginning. Mary Ann only understood water when it looked expensive. 106 days earlier, the eastern corner of my property looked completely different. "My name is Ethan Cole. I am 47, and I own 18 wooded acres bordering Silvermere Estates outside Raleigh. I have worked grading and drainage jobs for more than 20 years, which means I spend most of my life paying attention to things other people step over. Slope, soil, runoff, saturation, where water appears after rain and where it stays when the rain is gone. Along my eastern boundary was a groundwater seep no wider than 10 feet in most places. It was not picturesque. Nobody was taking wedding photographs beside it. The ground stayed dark and soft 12 months a year, and a thick line of deep green sedge grew where clear water slowly pushed through the soil. If I stepped there in work boots, my heels sank maybe half an inch. Frogs liked it. Mosquitoes liked it. Mary Ann hated it. At the lower end of the seep stood an old stone head wall, half buried beneath moss and leaves. Water slipped through a narrow opening in the stones with a quiet dripping sound I could hear on still evenings. A few feet uphill, an iron survey pin marked my property line. Those three things had been there since before Silvermere built its clubhouse, its walking paths, or the ornamental lake they printed on every real estate brochure. I knew because I had photographs, old plats, and 20 years of drainage experience telling me wet ground usually had a reason for staying wet. On May 14th, I was drinking coffee beside my equipment shed when the smell reached me before the noise did. Hot asphalt, then diesel, then the low mechanical rumble of a roller. I walked toward the eastern boundary and stopped beneath the trees. Silvermere contractors were spreading crushed stone directly across the green sedge. Black pavement waited in a truck behind them. Mary Ann stood beside the service road, holding a rolled plan and watching the work with satisfaction. I looked at the seep disappearing beneath gray gravel. Then I looked at her. "Tell me you have not started paving that." She smiled. "We are finally fixing it." I glanced at the iron survey pin still visible beside the fresh stone. "That is not a drainage problem." Mary Ann looked toward the wet ground like it had personally offended her. "Ethan, it is mud." Behind her, the roller started forward. And that was the first moment I realized Silvermere had no idea what was keeping its lake alive. The seep had never looked important enough for anyone at Silvermere to notice until Mary Ann decided it offended her idea of what a neighborhood edge should look like. That was exactly why I paid attention to it. Small water systems do not announce themselves. They leave clues. Darker soil, cooler ground, sedges that stay green when everything 10 feet away starts turning brown. A shallow groove where water has moved long enough to polish the stones smooth. I had watched that corner of my property through drought years, wet years, tropical storms, and dry Carolina summers. The flow changed, but it never disappeared. Even in August, when the clay hardened on the higher ground and my gravel driveway kicked up dust behind the truck, the seep stayed wet. That morning in May, before the contractors covered it, I walked down the slope and took photographs from 3 angles. The iron survey pin was the first thing I framed. Rusted top, yellow cap, exactly where my recorded plat said it should be. Then I photographed the dark sedge line running below it. Last came the old stone head wall near the lower end. The stones were rough, irregular, and stained dark from decades of moisture. Clear water slipped through the narrow opening underneath with that same soft dripping sound I had heard for years. Marianne watched me from beside the paving crew. "Are you seriously documenting weeds?" she asked. "I am documenting what is here before you cover it." She gave me a little laugh. "Ethan, this is why people hire professionals. You see a swamp. They see a drainage problem." I looked at the contractor closest to us. "Who designed this?" He glanced toward Marianne before answering. "We were given a service road widening plan. Any groundwater assessment?" He shifted his weight. "You would have to ask the association." Marianne stepped in immediately. "The homeowners association has maintained this corridor for years." Maintained is not the same as owned. I pointed toward the iron pin. "Your road ends on that side." Her smile flattened. She unrolled the plan across the hood of a utility cart and tapped a shaded strip with one fingernail. According to the drawing, Silvermere wanted a wider service road behind the clubhouse, enough for maintenance trucks and golf carts to pass without using the main entrance. The new asphalt shoulder crossed directly over the wettest part of my land. "This improves access, drainage, and appearance," she said. "Appearance? That area is always muddy. Because groundwater reaches the surface there. Then the water needs to be redirected." I shook my head. "You do not redirect something until you know where it is coming from and where it is going." She folded the plan. "You make mud sound like a public utility. Water does not become unimportant because nobody put a fountain in it." That irritated her. I could see it in the way her fingers tightened around the rolled paper. Behind us, the roller engine idled with a deep vibration. The air smelled like crushed stone, diesel, and wet leaves. I crouched beside the head wall and touched the soil with 2 fingers. Cold, saturated, steady. Marianne called it an eyesore. I saw a system. That difference mattered more than either of us understood yet. Before leaving, I took one final photograph showing all 3 markers together: the iron pin, the dark sedge, and the stone head wall. Then I backed away from the work area and let the camera timestamp save the moment. At the time, it felt like routine documentation. Later, those 3 details would become the simplest explanation for everything Silvermere claimed nobody could have predicted. Marianne did not wait for a second conversation. By 8:30 the next morning, the service road sounded like a construction site again. The first thing I heard was the backup alarm of a dump truck. Then came the grinding scrape of crushed stones spreading across wet ground. When I reached the eastern boundary, a gray layer of compacted base already covered half the sedge line. Steam lifted where the cool seep met the morning air. The old stone head wall was still visible, but only barely. A worker had pushed gravel against one side of it, narrowing the little opening where water had always slipped through. I took out my phone and started recording. Marianne stood beside a white utility vehicle wearing sunglasses and a pale blue jacket with the Silvermere logo on the chest. She looked pleased. "See," she said, "already cleaner." I pointed toward the iron survey pin. "Your crew is past the line." She did not even look. "We have a maintenance easement." "Then show me the recorded language." She held out a folded letter instead. Silvermere's attorney had written 3 paragraphs claiming the homeowners association possessed maintenance rights along the service corridor and could make reasonable drainage improvements. The letter mentioned access. It mentioned safety. It mentioned community standards. It never said they owned my land. "This is not an easement," I said. "This is a lawyer describing one." Marianne lowered her sunglasses slightly. "You really want to argue over 10 feet of mud?" Behind her, the asphalt truck rolled forward. Heat shimmered above the black material inside the bed. The smell hit hard, sharp and oily, cutting through the scent of wet leaves. "I want you to stop until the boundary and groundwater issue are reviewed." She gave me the same patient smile she used whenever she thought somebody was being difficult. "We are not stopping a scheduled improvement because you are emotionally attached to weeds." I looked down at the sedges disappearing beneath stone. "This has nothing to do with emotion." The paving crew began laying the first strip. Black asphalt rolled across gray base where green plants had been that morning. Moisture hissed underneath it. For a few seconds, thin white vapor curled along the edge of the pavement before disappearing. I photographed the survey pin again, then the head wall, then the fresh asphalt crossing beyond the property line. Marian watched me. Take all the pictures you want. When this is finished, you will thank us. For what? Making the area useful. The roller moved past us, its heavy drum pressing the surface flat. When it cleared, the ground looked exactly the way Marianne wanted it to look. Straight, black, dry, controlled. The dark sedge line was gone. Half the stone head wall had vanished beneath compacted gravel. Only the top of the iron pin remained visible beside the new shoulder. Marianne folded the attorney letter and slipped it back into her folder. Now it finally looks maintained. I listened for the soft dripping sound that had always come through the stones. I could barely hear it under the machinery. By late afternoon, I could not hear it at all. 2 days later, Silvermere mailed me another notice. This one demanded a share of the drainage improvement cost because, according to Marianne, the project benefited adjoining property owners. I read the amount, looked out toward the fresh black pavement, and almost admired the confidence. She had crossed my boundary, covered a groundwater seep, and sent me a bill for it. I did not pay. I called the county environmental office instead. The woman who answered took down my address, the construction date, and the location of the seep. Then she asked one question that made me sit up straighter. Did anyone complete a groundwater or wet area assessment before they paved? I looked through the window toward the eastern boundary. Not that they showed me. There was a pause on the line. Then do not disturb anything yourself. Document it exactly as it is. I already had. And for the first time since the asphalt went down, I stopped looking only at what Silvermere had covered. I started wondering what that water had been connected to. 3 days after the county call, I noticed the first change somewhere nobody at Silvermere was watching. The seep on my side of the new pavement had begun to dry. Not completely. Water still darkened the soil beneath the trees, but the steady saturation was gone. The sedge that remained beyond the asphalt looked duller at the tips, and the moss around the exposed edge of the stone head wall had started losing its deep green color. I crouched beside it one morning before work and pressed 2 fingers into the soil. Damp, not wet. That difference mattered. I wrote down the date, took another photograph, and measured the distance from the iron survey pin to the edge of the pavement. 11 feet, 4 inches of new asphalt crossed beyond the boundary shown on my plat. Marian still called it maintenance. I called Laura Bennett at the county environmental office and sent her everything I had documented. Photographs before construction. Photographs during paving. The attorney letter. The survey. The cost assessment Silvermere had mailed me afterward. Laura told me their review would take time because the first question was jurisdiction. Was the seep regulated? Was the work inside an easement? Had the homeowners association altered a groundwater discharge area without knowing it? She did not promise an answer. She only repeated what she had told me before. Do not change the site yourself. I did not. I went back to my regular jobs and kept notes. Then, about a week after the paving, I drove past Silvermere's public walking trail on my way home and noticed something at the Ornamental Lake. The decorative stone edge near the fountain had a pale, dry stripe around it, maybe an inch wide. I slowed down but kept driving. 1 inch did not prove anything. North Carolina was warming up, and evaporation was normal. 3 days later, the stripe was wider. That caught my attention. I parked in the public visitor area and walked the permitted trail that curved around the lake. The fountain was still running, sending a white plume into the afternoon sun. Kids rode bicycles nearby. 2 residents sat beneath a gazebo drinking iced tea. Everything looked normal until you looked down. The waterline had retreated enough to expose a band of darker stone along the shore. Wes Harper, Silvermere's maintenance supervisor, was standing near a small measuring post at the service dock. I knew Wes from a drainage repair I had done years earlier. He looked up when he saw me. "You checking our lake now?" he asked. His tone was joking, but his eyes were on the gauge. "Just walking. Good time for it. We are losing water faster than usual." I stopped. "How much faster?" Wes rubbed the back of his neck. "Couple inches this week. Marianne says it is the heat." I looked at the sky. We had been warm, but not unusually dry. Rainfall for the month was close to average. You adding municipal water? More than normal. The fountain pump clicked softly behind us as its spray fell back onto the surface. Has anything else changed? I asked. Wes shrugged. Not at the lake. That answer stayed with me. Not at the lake. I went home and pulled rainfall records from the previous 3 Mays. Then I compared them with photographs I had taken during drainage inspections around my own property. Similar rainfall. Similar temperatures. Silvermere's shoreline had never pulled back like that so early. I opened a fresh page in my notebook and wrote 2 dates at the top. May 14th, Seep paved. May 23rd, lake level visibly declining. I did not draw a conclusion. Not yet. I had spent too many years around water to confuse timing with proof. But systems leave patterns before they leave answers. And for the first time, the drying ground beside my property line and the shrinking lake behind Silvermere's clubhouse looked like they might be telling the same story. By the first week of June, the lake had dropped enough that even Marianne could no longer call it ordinary evaporation. The pale band around the shoreline had widened to nearly 6 inches in places, and Wes told me the maintenance crew was adding municipal water almost every other day just to keep the fountain intake covered. I still did not have proof that the paved seep was responsible, so I called Daniel Price, a hydrogeologist I had worked with on 2 commercial drainage projects. Daniel arrived the next morning carrying soil probes, elevation maps, and the kind of quiet curiosity that usually meant he had already noticed something everyone else had missed. We started at my eastern boundary. The air smelled like warm pine needles and damp clay. Daniel studied the remaining sedge, pushed a probe into the soil above the asphalt, then repeated the test below it. This ground used to stay saturated? He asked. Year-round. I showed him photographs from the previous summers. Dark soil, green sedge, water slipping through the old stone head wall. Then I showed him the construction photographs. Gravel, compaction, asphalt. The iron survey pin disappearing beside the widened road. Daniel crouched near the exposed edge of the head wall and traced the slope with his eyes. This is not just runoff, he said. You have shallow groundwater expressing along this contour. He wanted older site plans. That sent me looking for Nathan Briggs, the civil engineer who had worked on Silvermere's original development nearly 20 years earlier. Nathan was retired, but he still kept project files in a climate-controlled room behind his garage. 2 days later, I sat across from him at a folding table while he opened a yellowing plan set labeled Silvermere Phase 1. The paper smelled faintly of dust and blueprint ink. We found the lake section first. Surface runoff entered from the north and west. Storm drains fed it during heavy rain. Nothing surprising. Then Nathan turned to a grading sheet and stopped. A dashed line ran from the eastern hillside toward the lake basin. Beside it was a note in small lettering. Supplemental base flow from eastern groundwater discharge. I read it twice. Where is that discharge point? Nathan adjusted his glasses and followed the contour lines with one finger. The route ended almost exactly where my seep had been. There, he said. That wet area was part of the reason the lake held level so well in summer. He explained that the Ornamental lake had never depended on the seep alone. Rainfall and stormwater did most of the visible work. But the shallow groundwater provided something different. Steady background flow when the weather turned hot and surface runoff disappeared. Small water. Constant water. The kind nobody notices until it stops. Then Nathan pointed to another symbol on the old plan. Stone head wall. Existing drainage feature to remain. I felt the pieces settle into place. The moss-covered stones Marianne had dismissed as useless were not random landscaping debris. They marked an older drainage pathway that predated Silvermere itself. Daniel reviewed the plans that afternoon and agreed the connection was plausible enough to investigate formally. Laura Bennett from the County Environmental Office received the same documents. Nobody declared the case finished. Nobody needed to. The timeline was already getting harder to ignore. The seep had stayed wet for decades. Silvermere's lake had held summer levels for years. Then the Homeowners Association paved the discharge area, compacted the soil, restricted the old drainage feature, and within days both systems began changing. I stood beside the stone head wall that evening and listened. No dripping. Just cicadas and the distant fountain from Silvermere struggling to keep its perfect white spray above a lake that was slowly losing the one source of water nobody had thought worth protecting. By the middle of June, Silvermere stopped pretending the lake level was normal and started looking for water anywhere they could find it. Wes called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was loading drainage pipe onto my trailer. Marianne wants to talk to you, he said. About the lake? About your well. That got my attention. I had a private well near the equipment shed, deep enough to supply my house, wash station, and workshop without depending on municipal service. It was not designed to support a subdivision lake, and I had no intention of turning it into one. Marianne arrived less than an hour later in her white sport utility vehicle. She stepped out carrying a folder, but no attorney letter this time. The June heat had settled over the property, and cicadas buzzed so loudly in the trees that she had to raise her voice. "We need temporary cooperation," she said. "That sounds different from maintenance rights." Her mouth tightened. "Silvermere is experiencing an unusual water loss. We are proposing a temporary hose connection from your well until conditions stabilize." I looked past her toward the eastern boundary. The new service road was black and clean in the sun. The seep beside it was nearly dry. "Conditions changed right after you paved that area?" "That has not been proven. Neither has your right to use my well." Marianne opened the folder and showed me a one-page proposal offering to reimburse electrical costs. She spoke about community appearance, property values, and protecting the lake before the 4th of July weekend. "This is neighborly cooperation," she said. "Is the pavement coming out?" She blinked. "That is not necessary." "Then neither is my well." Her expression hardened. "You are willing to let 300 families lose a community amenity over a strip of wet ground." "I am willing to leave the system exactly as it is until the county finishes reviewing what your association changed." I kept my voice level. Laura Bennett had already warned me not to alter the site, and Daniel had said pumping additional groundwater from my property could muddy the investigation by changing local conditions. I was not going to create a new variable just because Marianne wanted the lake blue for a holiday photograph. "You could solve this today," she said. "No, I could hide it today." That ended the conversation. She folded the proposal, walked back to her vehicle, and left gravel crunching behind her tires. July arrived hot and bright. Afternoon temperatures climbed into the middle 90s. The fountain continued running, but its spray was lowered to conserve water. The shoreline retreated another foot in several places. Decorative stones that had always sat underwater dried pale in the sun. Wes began recording lake levels every morning and evening. I kept my own notes at the seep. The remaining soil moisture dropped. The old stone head wall stayed silent. On July 6th, Laura visited the boundary with Daniel. They photographed the asphalt, measured the distance from the iron survey pin, and examined the buried side of the head wall. Marian joined us halfway through the inspection and immediately blamed the weather. Laura did not argue. She simply asked for Silvermere's lake maintenance records, water purchase receipts, construction plans, and the authorization for the road widening. Marian said she would provide everything. Daniel looked toward the dry sedge line, then toward the lake visible through the trees. "The useful thing about water," he said quietly, "is that it leaves a timeline." Marian heard him. For the first time since May, she did not have an answer ready. By the 3rd week of July, Silvermere's lake had stopped looking elegant and started looking exposed. The decorative stone shoreline that had once disappeared cleanly beneath blue water now stood several inches above it, leaving a dark ring around the basin like a bathtub nobody had drained properly. The fountain was still running, but only in short cycles. Wes had lowered the spray again because the intake was getting too close to the surface. Every time the pump started, I could hear a faint, uneven sputter mixed into the normal hum. One afternoon, I walked the public trail and found him standing beside the control box with a wrench in one hand and a notebook in the other. "Another 4 inches this week," he said before I asked. "Municipal water?" "Not enough to keep up." He looked toward the clubhouse. "Marianne wants the fountain on for weekend tours. That pump is going to lose prime." Wes nodded. I told her. 2 days later, the fountain stopped completely. No announcement. No dramatic failure. Just silence where there had always been water falling back into water. That silence changed the whole property. Without the spray, the lake looked flatter, smaller, more honest. By July 29th, the maintenance crew had installed temporary aeration near the deepest remaining section and started moving fish under guidance from a local pond service before conditions worsened. That was the right call, and I respected Wes for pushing it through. Nobody needed a preventable wildlife problem to make the point. The shoreline kept retreating anyway. Mud appeared first along the shallow eastern edge. Dark, glossy clay that reflected the afternoon sun. Then the surface dried enough to turn dull brown. The smell changed too. Less like pond water, more like warm earth after a storm that never came. Marian stopped speaking to me directly. Her attorney sent one letter suggesting my refusal to provide emergency well access had contributed to the association's losses. Laura Bennett forwarded me a copy of the county's response. It was short. Private groundwater use was not required, and the active review concerned whether Silvermere's own road project had altered an existing discharge area. I printed that letter and put it beside the others. August came in hot. 97 degrees one Tuesday, 95 the next. Daniel and I met at the Seep early one morning before the heat built. He pushed a soil probe beside the asphalt and frowned at the reading. Still drying. Lake 2. Same clock. He had finished comparing Silvermere's maintenance logs with rainfall records and Nathan's original plans. The pattern was becoming harder to explain away. Previous summers had been hotter. Some had been drier. The lake had fluctuated, but it had never dropped this quickly while municipal makeup water was being added. The major variable was sitting under our boots. Compacted stone. Asphalt. A partially buried head wall. Laura arrived an hour later with the preliminary findings. She did not make a speech. She handed Marianne a written notice requesting immediate preservation of the paved area until the final determination. Marianne read it twice. "This proves nothing," she said. Laura looked at the dry sedge line. "It proves enough to stop pretending nothing changed." By the second week of August, the first crack appeared in the exposed clay near the eastern shoreline. Thin at first, barely wider than a pencil mark. 3 days later, there were dozens. Then hundreds. The lake had not vanished, but the shallow basin around it had turned into a patchwork of hard brown plates. Silvermere quietly removed the banner advertising its lakefront summer social. Wes called me that evening. "She still says it is drought." I stood beside the old stone head wall, listening to nothing. "Then the records should make her comfortable." He laughed once, tired more than amused. "I do not think they are going to." Neither did I. The asphalt had covered the Seep for almost 3 months. Now the lake was finally showing everyone what the ground had been trying to say since May. By August 22nd, there was no longer any way to stand beside Silvermere's Ornamental lake and pretend the problem was cosmetic. The water had retreated far enough that the fountain base sat exposed above a broad shelf of dry clay. Cracks spread across the eastern basin in long branching lines, some wide enough to collect fallen leaves. The summer social tables never came out. The clubhouse banners stayed folded in storage. Instead, a county vehicle pulled into the maintenance lot just after 9 in the morning, followed by Daniel Price and Nathan Briggs. Laura Bennett stepped out carrying a thick inspection folder. Marianne met them near the shoreline wearing the same polished expression she had used back in May. But the lake behind her made that expression harder to sell. "This is a drought issue," she said before anyone asked. Laura looked toward the exposed clay. "Then the records should support that." We started with rainfall. Daniel had compared the previous 6 summers against the current season. There had been hotter years. There had been drier years. None showed a water level decline matching the drop that began immediately after the service road widening. Then Wes handed over the maintenance logs. Every lake level reading. Every municipal water addition. Every fountain adjustment. The dates lined up almost perfectly. May 14th, Seep paved. May 23rd, visible lake decline. June, increased makeup water. July, repeated low-level warnings. August, exposed clay. Marianne kept insisting the lake had always fluctuated. Nathan opened the original Silvermere plan set on the hood of Laura's vehicle. His finger landed on the note he had shown me weeks earlier. Supplemental base flow from eastern groundwater discharge. Then he pointed to the old stone headwall symbol marked existing drainage feature to remain. Marianne stared at the sheet. "That is 20 years old." Nathan nodded. "So is the groundwater." Laura turned to me. I handed her the photographs. First image, the iron survey pin standing beside untouched green sedge. Second, the stone headwall with water moving through it. Third, the paving crew spreading crushed stone over the saturated area. Fourth, fresh asphalt crossing more than 11 feet beyond the property line. Fifth, the same location after the seep began drying. No speeches, just sequence. Marianne looked from the photographs to the service road behind us. "Our attorney said we had maintenance rights." Laura answered calmly. "Maintenance rights do not automatically authorize sealing a groundwater discharge area or extending pavement beyond the documented boundary." Marianne's shoulders stiffened. So what exactly are you saying? Laura opened the county notice. We are directing Silvermere Estates to remove the unapproved pavement and compacted base from the affected area, restore the drainage feature, and submit a groundwater restoration plan for review. The only sound for a moment was cicadas buzzing in the trees. Marianne looked at me. You knew this would happen. I knew something changed after you paved it. And you let the lake keep dropping. I left the system alone while the county figured out what your project changed. That distinction mattered. I had not shut a valve. I had not blocked a pipe. I had not touched their lake. Silvermere had changed the ground, then spent 3 months trying to solve every symptom except the cause. Laura handed Marianne the written order. Work needs to begin within the compliance window. Marianne read the first page twice. Behind her, sunlight fell across the cracked clay where the lake used to reach. Near the deepest remaining water, temporary aeration hummed softly. I looked past the clubhouse toward the black strip of service road covering what had once been green sedge and cold wet soil. For months, Marianne had called that little seep ugly, muddy, unnecessary. Now the county had put in writing what the landscape had been saying all summer. The smallest water on my property had been doing more work than the biggest lake in Silvermere. The restoration crew arrived during the first week of September, almost 4 months after the service road had been widened. I heard the concrete saw before I saw the trucks. The sharp mechanical whine carried through the trees, followed by the dull scrape of broken asphalt being lifted away piece by piece. I walked toward the eastern boundary and stopped beside the iron survey pin. For the first time since May, the black pavement was coming up instead of going down. The smell was different too. Less hot tar, more damp soil. Workers removed the asphalt, then the compacted stone underneath, careful to stay within the limits shown on Laura Bennett's restoration plan. When they exposed the old stone head wall, mud clung to the lower rocks, and a dark line showed where moisture had once moved through continuously. Daniel Price stood beside me watching the excavation. Give it time, he said. Compacted ground does not forget overnight. I nodded. That was true of more than soil. Silvermere had its own cleanup happening at the same time. Carol Myers, the treasurer, called me a week later. Residents had demanded a special meeting after the county order became public. They wanted to know how much the road project had cost, how much the restoration would cost, and why the Homeowners Association had spent additional money trying to maintain the lake instead of investigating the seep when Wes first reported the drop. I did not attend. That was their business. A few days later, Carol called again. Marianne Prescott had been removed as president by a homeowner vote. The board suspended several landscaping projects and adopted a new rule requiring independent environmental review before future drainage work near property boundaries. I thanked her and went back to my own work. By the middle of September, native sedges had been replanted along the restored discharge area. Rain came twice that week, slow, steady showers instead of hard summer storms. The first morning after the second rain, I walked down to the head wall before sunrise. The ground was darker than it had been in months. I crouched beside the stones and waited. At first, all I heard was wind in the trees. Then one drop fell through the opening. Another followed. Then a thin thread of water slipped over the lower stone and disappeared into the grass. It was not dramatic. It did not need to be. I touched the soil beside the sedge. Cold, wet, alive again. Silvermere's lake did not refill overnight. That would have been too easy, and water does not work that way. Through late September and October, the level rose gradually as autumn rain returned and the restored groundwater path began contributing again. The cracked clay softened first. Then shallow water covered the eastern edge. By November, Wes told me the fountain intake was safely submerged, though the board decided to keep the fountain off until the lake reached a stable winter level. I respected that decision. Patience had finally made it into Silvermere's maintenance plan. One evening near the end of October, I stood beside the iron survey pin and looked through the trees toward the lake. I could not see much of the water from my property, just a narrow silver reflection beyond the clubhouse. What I could hear was more important. Water was moving through the old stone head wall again. Soft, steady, almost easy to miss. Marianne had spent months treating that seep like worthless mud because nobody had landscaped it, named it, or built a fountain in the middle of it. She thought the lake was the valuable water because everyone could see it. She never understood that the water keeping it alive was the part nobody noticed.